Oh, hey. Fancy meeting you here. You've once again caught me in the middle of something. I have a lot to fill you in on since that video about Shadow Dragon. So, we defeated the sinister Shadow Shrimp Crustaceus, and we reclaimed Lemonade Lobster's kingdom. Things were good for a while, but it turns out Crustaceus survived the last encounter and is currently rebuilding his strength to once again try to conquer the kingdom and destroy Lemonade Lobster for good. Unfortunately, since I helped Lemonade Lobster foil Crustaceus' last evil plot, looks like Crustaceus wants me dead too. To that end, he hired these assassin snails to try to take me out. I'd really appreciate if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel. Lemonade Lobster and I alone aren't enough to hold off Crustaceus forever, and we really need to grow our forces. Only about 12% of my regular viewers are subscribed. If you subscribe to the channel right now, you can join the fight and help end the sinister Shadow Shrimp's reign of terror forever. You know, this whole situation kind of reminds me of a game I've been wanting to talk about. If I weren't currently fighting off an army of assassins, I'd almost say it's a great opportunity to do a video. You know what? I think we have some time actually. Let's talk some Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, Heroes of Light and Shadow, or FE12 for short, which I'll be calling it for the rest of the video because the full name is a mouthful. As you could probably tell, FE12 is the 12th game in the Fire Emblem series. It's a direct sequel to Shadow Dragon, and also a remake of the second half of Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem, which itself is both a remake of Fire Emblem 1 and a direct sequel to FE1. But is Fire Emblem 3 rather than Fire Emblem 2, because Fire Emblem 2 is actually Fire Emblem Gaiden, which is technically a sequel for Fire Emblem 1 and a midquel of Mystery of the Emblem, not to be confused with its remake Shadows of Valentia, which is the midquel of Shadow Dragon in FE12, and also a prequel to Awakening, a distant sequel of FE12, which features a distant descendant of a character from Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, and is also connected to Fire Emblem Fates because the disembodied soul of a dragon with Alzheimer's sent 3 teenagers through a portal one time. So yeah, simple enough, are you following? All of that is to say, this game is a continuation of Marth's story from Shadow Dragon. 1 year after the War of Shadows, in which Marth gathers an army and defeats the Shadow Dragon Madius to retake his kingdom and save the continent, Marth's kingdom is taken from him, and he's forced to gather an army in order to defeat the Shadow Dragon Madius, retake his kingdom, and save the continent. Wait a second. Okay, that little summary is definitely an oversimplification. The path there is different and FE12 has its own stories and mysteries going on. But looking at the essential bullet points, the plot here isn't all that dissimilar to Shadow Dragon. The entire cast of Shadow Dragon also comes back in this game, as well as a few reused maps. You'll definitely get a sense of deja vu playing through this game. At least you would, if you actually got to play it. A lot of people I know that have dabbled in Fire Emblem but never gotten into the weeds of it don't actually know this game exists. To the untrained eye, it just looks like there was a long gap between Shadow Dragon and the glorious return to form and/or descent into hell that was Awakening. If you look a little bit closer though, you'll see that FE12 was actually just hiding from us all the way back in Japan. That's right, for the first time in almost a decade, a Fire Emblem game didn't receive an English localization, and to this day, it still hasn't. Accounts vary on exactly why FE12 didn't make its way over here, but if I had to guess, it probably didn't make much economic sense to get it localized. Radiant Dawn was a giant money sink for the series that didn't exactly make much back in return, hence why the next game was a much smaller scale project in Shadow Dragon. Now, Shadow Dragon was a remake of an old Japan-exclusive Famicom game, which already didn't give it the widest appeal, especially overseas. Couple that with the ugly visuals and hardcore strategy gameplay, and they entirely lost the casual gamer audience that the DS lived and died by, particularly in the West. Basically, the only people left to care were hardcore Fire Emblem fans, which there were a lot less of back in the day, and maybe occasionally a stray RPG enthusiast or a curious Smash player. As much as I love Shadow Dragon, it's obvious why it wasn't exactly the series' biggest success. Therefore, it's not that difficult to see why Nintendo decided an FE12 localization wasn't worth it. Thankfully, the fans decided it was worth it, and a dedicated team of translators released a full translation patch after the game's release. It's really solid work. The writing is mostly consistent with the tone they set in Shadow Dragon. I'd be hard-pressed to find any text that comes off as particularly stilted or unprofessional. The translation is over a decade old now, and aside from the names of some characters being outdated translations as they've gotten official names in years since, I honestly don't think it's in need of any kind of major update. It's honestly really cool seeing the product of what a group of dedicated fans can do when the big guys upstairs fail to deliver. So, FE12 was worth it to the fans, but I'm sure you're wondering, dear viewer, is it worth it for you? Is this game another quirky classic like Shadow Dragon, or should it have stayed in Japan? Let's break it down and take a look at all of its components to start figuring that out, shall we? As I just said, Shadow Dragon was a quirky classic, and one of its most defining quirks was its bold art direction. Its character artwork had all of the charisma of an undercooked McChicken. Its maps looked like said McChicken after making its way through your entire digestive system, and the character models were the Grimace and Hamburglar Happy Meal toys that you didn't ask for. In short, Shadow Dragon was an ugly game. Therefore, given that the two games are made in the same engine, it follows that FE12 would also be an ugly game, correct? Well, kinda? FE12 still has Shadow Dragon's ugly DNA, but it's had quite the glow up in my opinion. The character portraits look significantly better in this game across the board. The biggest beneficiary of this is our main hero Marth, because oh my god, they did this man dirty in Shadow Dragon. Seriously, this angle looks like he has no neck or chin, his face is super round, he looks like he belongs on the side of your Denny's Grand Slam. Here in FE12, he looks like Marth as we've known him since Melee. Regal, princely, royal, and other such adjectives. He has both a chin and a neck in FE12. This is huge for the blue guy. Marth isn't the only beneficiary of the move over to FE12, however. Just about every other character from Shadow Dragon has also been subtly touched up. For example, let's look at our boy Mathis, everyone's favorite Fire Emblem Cavalier, aside from these exceptions. I feel like the difference here speaks for itself. The colors are more vivid, his face is slimmer, his shoulders are wider. He went from the personification of a soggy oyster cracker in Shadow Dragon to a boss-grinding, silver lance-wielding, looks-maxing paladin cell here in FE12. With the two juxtaposed side by side like this, Shadow Dragon Mathis looks physically ill. There are so many changes here, but they're all so subtle. Any one of them alone may have gone unnoticed, but in their totality they make a world of difference. The subtle graphical upgrade extends to the maps as well. Let's look at a map that's in both games, Jasmine Bridge. The muddy and washed out look of Shadow Dragon's version has been injected with some color and life. It's a brilliant mix of Shadow Dragon's painted aesthetic and the bright colors of Mystery of the Emblem. Considering what they were working with, these maps look about as good as they possibly could have without completely compromising the groundwork they laid out with Shadow Dragon. It's not the most bombastic upgrade, but it works perfectly. This injection of color and light doesn't stop with the maps either. Even combat looks better. The backgrounds are vivid and vibrant. They look so nice that they even make the shitty character models pop. Combat is further improved by the addition of a flash and an accompanying sound effect whenever a unit gets a critical hit. It gives the critical animations that were quite underwhelming in Shadow Dragon so much more punch, even though the animations themselves are the exact same. And finally, while the character models may not look any better in combat, they look significantly better on the map itself. The addition of 2 simple pixels for eyes has multiplied the personality of these little sprites 1,000-fold. So while FE12 may not be the prettiest game, I can't in good conscience call it ugly, even subjectively. I think it looks perfectly fine, which is a massive upgrade from the actively ugly Shadow Dragon. So at least graphically, FE12 is a major upgrade from Shadow Dragon. But here's a more important question. Is it an upgrade from Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem, the game it's remaking? This is where the waters muddy a bit and opinions tend to diverge. Now, full disclosure, I've never played the original Mystery of the Emblem. I don't like FE1 through 5 very much, I just don't have much of an affinity for any games of that era. Side effect of being a zoomer, I guess. But from what I understand, FE12 is kind of a shit remake. Now, when I say it's a bad remake, I don't quite mean it's a bad game. I quite like FE12, and a lot of other people do too. Many fans enjoy both Mystery of the Emblem and FE12, but as a remake, as a way of experiencing Mystery of the Emblem Book 2, FE12 falls short. Now how is that the case? Is the gameplay too different? Well, yes, but Fire Emblem has changed a lot since the olden days. They were never going to play exactly the same. That's not the problem. So is FE12 missing some kind of content from the original then? No, not at all. In fact, the big sticking point isn't anything missing from FE12. It's not anything the devs took away, it's what they added. This guy. Chris Fire Emblem. I've already made a whole video discussing Fire Emblem avatars with a section dedicated to talking about Chris, but in case you missed it, Chris was the first ever playable avatar character in Fire Emblem. FE12 adds an 8-map prologue in which Chris joins the Altean Knights, and through a series of events that puts him in the right place at the right time, he ends up somehow becoming Marth's right-hand man and captain of his royal guard. Chris is controversial, to say the least, for a number of reasons. For one thing, he's one of the most broken characters in Fire Emblem history. To say that he snaps the game balance in half would be a gross understatement. He holds FE12 so firmly in his grasp that if he flexes his hand hard enough, the game will become so dense that it collapses in on itself and creates a miniature black hole, ripping everything in Arcanea apart by its very atoms. Not Chris himself though, Chris could totally take a black hole in a fight. Chris's bases, growth rates, and class are customizable, much more so than even later customizable avatars like Robin and Corrin. This means Chris can be min-maxed to perform whatever role you want him to, and he'll be the best at it from the word go. Speaking of the word go, he's the only one there at the starting line. Chris is your first unit and the only one with perfect availability. He's in every single map, from Prologue 1 to Endgame. Not only is using the entire 8-chapter prologue just to grind Chris up optimal, I shit you not, it's also by far the easiest and most convenient and fun way to play the prologue, especially on higher difficulties. By the time you get to Chapter 1, Chris is capable of soloing entire maps, and he will continue to until enemies start capping stats in the late game, in which case he'll still be one of your best units once everyone else finally catches up. Chris is so poorly thought out and outright broken that it borders on absurdity. Speaking of absurdity, how are they supposed to add a whole-ass second main character to a 20-year-old story that he originally didn't even exist in? Well, with new story content, of course. He has an entire side plot involving his friends from the prologue that spans the entire game in optional side chapters. No, thankfully, Chris stays relegated to this side story, because it would just be ridiculous if he was a prominent player in the main story. The joke is that he's pivotal to the main plot. Well, I guess pivotal is the wrong word. Obviously the plot still has to happen without Chris. It did in Mystery of the Emblem after all. Marth is still the main character here. So how does Chris fit in? Well, he basically just replaces Jagen. Jagen isn't playable in either Mystery of the Emblem or FE12. In Mystery of the Emblem, he's retired from combat and plays an advisory role to Marth. It makes sense, the guy was already old before he fought an entire war a year ago. This is the perfect way for him to rest his old bones while still serving his liege. A nice little bit of character development, a rare thing in Arcanea. Well, in FE12, Chris just says fuck that and becomes Marth's advisor and vassal, relegating Jagen to basically just be Chris's advisor. Fuck you, Jagen, shouldn't have gotten old. It gets worse though. Chris isn't just Marth's advisor, he also ends up being Marth's super special, most bestest friend in the whole wide world forever. In fact, Chris is Marth's entire backbone, his other half. Marth couldn't have done it without him. In fact, according to the intro, it was always this way. Mystery of the Emblem 20 years ago just wasn't a complete retelling of the story. So yeah, Marth's main source of support isn't the loyal knight who saved his life and was almost a surrogate father figure to him. It's not his older sister that he thought gave her life to protect him as a child. It's not even his beautiful and supportive fiancée. Nope, it's this guy he met like a few weeks ago. And the cherry on top, the thing that really ties it all together for me, is that this isn't just some guy. This isn't just any new character. This is an avatar character. This is you. Yeah, I'm calling him Chris because that's his default name, but the intent here is for Chris to be a self-insert. He's intentionally a fairly flat and boring character so you can project yourself onto him. So, to recap, Marth doesn't just inexplicably have a new best friend, he is inexplicably now your best friend. You are special. You are worthy of being besties with the legendary Hero King. You are the center of the universe.
Marth, darling, I was wondering, do you think perhaps we could sleep together tonight?
Oh, Sita, you silly thing. Can't you see I'm busy playing Mario Kart with my best friend in the whole wide world?
Marth, you barely even know this man.
Prince Marth, do you want cheese or pepperoni? Well, pepperoni, of course.
Well, okay, I understand you're busy. It's just that it's been weeks since I last saw you.
Prince Marth, they said they have a deal going on where you get free garlic knots if you buy 2 pizzas. Well, we're practically burning bullions if we don't get another pizza then.
Marth,
Are you sure you can eat a whole pizza and half an order of garlic knots yourself, sire? Well, probably. I am rather hungry. Worst case, if there's leftovers, we can share. Sita, would you eat leftover garlic knots?
I don't...
Ah, who am I kidding? Chris and I will finish them all between us. You want a 2-liter of Coke too, right? Ah, my best friend, my closest ally. You know me so well. What would I do without you? First time. So Chris is rather clumsily inserted into the story, and the game is irrevocably changed because of it. He's the chief reason why, despite not being a bad Fire Emblem game in and of itself, FE12 is not that great of a way to truly experience the story of Mystery of the Emblem. Thankfully, if you want to play the game without Chris, he's not required for much after the prologue aside from recruiting one optional character in the late game. You can bench him for the entire game and get something a little bit closer to the original Mystery of the Emblem experience, albeit with Shadow Dragon's mechanics. Mechanically, FE12 is more or less identical to Shadow Dragon, including all of the fun bells and whistles like reclassing and replacement units. Similarly to Shadow Dragon, FE12 does something I appreciate. It really leans into the permadeath aspect of Fire Emblem. The game gives you an absolutely absurd amount of playable characters at a whopping 77, the most of any Fire Emblem game. When a character dies, you probably have at least 5 other options you could replace them with at any given time. If you thought Daros was disposable in Shadow Dragon, just wait until you get him in FE12, where for some reason he's hanging out with fucking dragons in a fiery hellscape. Yar, I be Daros, born to die, Arcania is a fuck. Kill 'em all, Mystery of the Emblem. I be Trash Pirate. 410,757,864,530 dead fire dragons. Aside from Jaken and Lorenz, every single worthless schmuck from Shadow Dragon has returned here, including the ones that were cut from the original Mystery of the Emblem. Then of course there are the new characters they added in the original, like Warren or the twins. Then there are the brand new characters like Chris. You'd think that would be it, but no, it goes even deeper. Going beyond the bottom of the barrel and scraping the mantle of the very earth, allow me to introduce you to the cast of Fire Emblem Arcania Saga, colloquially known as BS Fire Emblem, a quote-unquote game released exclusively through the Satellaview in Japan. I'm not going to go into the whole history lesson here, but the basic summary is that BS Fire Emblem was a selection of 4 maps that were live streamed to your console via satellite and playable for a limited time. I'm talking hours at a time, a few times ever. Most of the characters usable in these maps were characters from FE1 and 3, but 6 original characters, Frost, Dice, Malice, Belf, Roberto, and Raiden, were brand new characters who were promptly wiped from existence the moment the game stopped streaming. That is, until FE12 came along and shoehorned them into your already bloated army. You get so many units thrown at you in every single chapter of FE12. It is relentless. We're looking at levels of cannon fodder never thought possible. Now, while the fun disposability of the playable cast that I appreciated so much in Shadow Dragon is still here, for me, personally, a little something was lost in the transition. My main complaint boils down to the unit balance. In Shadow Dragon, the game makes no illusions as to which units are good and which ones are bad. Plain and simple, the good ones are mostly the ones you get first, and subsequent units are worse. Sometimes comically bad, as an incentive for the player to do everything in their power to keep the A-team alive. In this way, a lot of Shadow Dragon units stood out to me and became extremely memorable, ironically despite their complete lack of characterization. The way Daros can recruit himself and then die instantly on enemy phase. The way Mathis, Violent, and Roche have absolutely nothing going for them even as early game cavaliers. The very fact that Tomas exists in the state that he does. It's all hilarious. I treasure each and every one of these bland, personalityless pancakes in Shadow Dragon. Then FE12 came along and fucked everything up by buffing every single character in the game to the bare minimum level of mediocrity. Bases and growths were drastically improved across the board. Just about every character with investment will turn out perfectly serviceable, even good in time. This sounds like a good thing on paper. Now you can use your favorites and still be relatively effective. But this is DS Fire Emblem. Sure, every character has a little more characterization than in Shadow Dragon because they get 3 conversations with Chris and occasional flavor text on the preparation screen, but at the end of the day, these characters are almost all still completely devoid of personality in character. If you have a favorite, it's not based on much. Where units were once given character and recognizability by being absolutely abysmal, they've now faded into obscurity, completely losing themselves in the sea of identically mediocre faces. Aside from obvious standouts like Chris, Palla, and Sirius, almost every character is completely interchangeable with their replacements. The only thing any given character tends to have over another is availability. There's no dynamic like Cain and Abel versus Violent, Roche, and Mathis. Your Chapter 1 Cavaliers in this game, Luke, Roderick, and Cecile, perform about as well as Mathis, who is about as good as Frey, who is pretty much interchangeable with Cain, who is barely any different from Belf and Raiden. Now, obviously, there is some nuance. You can make a tier list, characters aren't literally all identical, but the variability is a lot tighter in this game. Arcanea's finest aren't all that far behind the heavy hitters, and I think something in the game's personality is lost there because of it. The unit balance isn't the only place where I feel FE12 lost some of Shadow Dragon's personality. The game's progression is also far less dynamic, and it feels much less like your own personalized story. In Shadow Dragon, there are side objectives aside from just beating Madius at the end. For example, defeating Garnif and obtaining Marth's sword, the falchion, was completely optional. If you didn't get the Starlight Tome, or if you didn't have someone to wield it that was strong enough to actually defeat Garnif, you could miss out on an important step in Marth's journey, and have one less important tool to beat the final boss. Maybe you didn't recruit Tiki either, and now you get Nagi instead, with a shitty version of the falchion. Regardless whether you achieved these side objectives and triumphantly defeated the final boss, or you absolutely fucked it and barely stumbled over the finish line, no matter what your playthrough looked like, you still got to actually finish the game. FE12 throws all of this out the window. In order to get the true ending, which includes 4 entire chapters, 7 playable characters, and the final boss, you need to collect these 12 Star Shard items over the course of the early game, along with some other side objectives. Now, some of the shards are pretty hard to miss. They might be dropped by a boss or in the inventory of a recruitable character, but others might be in a really out-of-the-way chest, or a village, or in the inventory of an enemy thief that will leave the map and render it uncollectible. If you miss even one of these shards, you are completely locked into the bad ending. Oh, what's that? You forgot to open this chest in Chapter 6? Well, fuck you, Arcanea is doomed, and you fucking suck. Because of this, it feels like you need a guide to get the full FE12 experience. Playing this game without a guide will just end with you wasting your time on an incomplete playthrough. FE12 continues to miss out on the personality of Shadow Dragon and other aspects of the gameplay as well. A lot of the choose-your-own-adventure aspects of Shadow Dragon's game balance are absent. Remember the crazy warp strats in the last game? Well, here in FE12, you don't get the warp staff until much later, and you get far fewer uses of it. On higher difficulties, the devs just said fuck it and don't even give you warp at all. So there's an entire playstyle out the window. Sure, you can still find other ways to play fast, but the warp staff's brokenness was part of what made the DS Fire Emblem engine in particular so interesting for speedrunning and low turn counting. Please, I am begging you, go watch Don 151. Technically, FE12 does still retain a lot of Shadow Dragon's exploitability, allowing for silly strats like breaking a boss's weapon and grinding near infinite experience on it. But why would you do that when you already have an incredibly broken unit that solos everything right out of the prologue? The thing that made that kind of cheese grinding rewarding and fun in Shadow Dragon is that it gave you something you didn't already have. You don't have a Juggernaut unit like that in the early game unless you cleverly cheese it. Why waste time shooting the boss with Gordon for half an hour when he'll still just end up being a far worse Chris? This means that for the most part, FE12 is best played somewhere in the middle, with an earnest attempt to play the game and engage with its systems without cheesing it or trying to go faster than intended. That doesn't sound so bad until you realize that this game also features some of Fire Emblem's most poorly designed maps ever. You don't have to dig far to find these bad maps either. The game throws its worst map at you right up front with Chapter 3, Abducted Princess. Let's take a deeper look and analyze everything that's wrong here, shall we? This map is fucking gigantic, but you don't really start all that far away from the gate that Marth needs to seize. It's right here. So what's the problem? Well, everything is the problem. First of all, there are 4 recruitable characters on this map: Palla, Bord, Julian, and Mathis. Palla joins your army on turn 1, but she's separated into the top right corner, with a legion of powerful Draco Knights blocking her from rendezvousing with the rest of the team. Bord is in this village all the way over here to the left, and Julian is in this top right village. Keep in mind, in DS Fire Emblem, only Marth can visit villages, and he's also the only one who can seize the gate and end the chapter. Marth has a lot of places to be on this map. Now Palla is very strong. Absurdly strong for when you get her, actually. She is far and away the best unit in this game, aside from Chris. Despite this, however, she isn't tanky enough to take on hordes of enemies by herself on higher difficulties, which is a problem in this chapter, because a constant stream of Cavalier reinforcements will spawn by her and overwhelm her within a few turns. So you have to save her by uniting her with your army proper. She can't just fly down to you, though. Remember, Draco Knights, and they're even stronger than the Cavaliers. Okay, so if she can't come to you, you go to her then. Just have your army cross this drawbridge and go through the middle, right? Well, that's not going to work either if you want to recruit every character. Mathis is a recruitable enemy in this group right here, and unlike in Shadow Dragon where you can recruit him with Marth, you can only recruit him by talking to him with Julian. Julian is in this village in the top right, which if you go this way, requires you to go right through Mathis, who is so weak that he will likely get himself killed if he attacks one of your stronger units. So essentially, the game is using Mathis as a meat shield to prevent you from going this way. This is all assuming you're even strong enough to deal with the onslaught of Draco Knights that will attack you if you go this way. So what you actually want to do is have an overleveled Chris escort Marth all the way around, stopping to recruit Bord along the way, letting Chris deal with every enemy that comes your way, as Marth and Bord cower behind him and Palla makes a beeline away from the Cavaliers. When you finally get Julian from the village, you then want to go all the way back around and meet back up with your army and lower the drawbridge so Julian can recruit Mathis and you can finally finish the map. What an absolute shit show. Now, while that was bad, it would be disingenuous of me to claim the rest of FE12 is anywhere near this terrible. Chapter 3 is far and away the worst this game has to offer and is often brought up in conversations about the worst map in Fire Emblem history. But it's still a sign of things to come. This game is loaded with tedious maps full of walking, bad terrain, janky linked enemy AI, and ambush spawn reinforcements. Playing this game without a guide is already a risk since you might miss a star shard or a character, but now you want to have every map's wiki page open as you're playing it so you don't get jumped by a bunch of reinforcements that you can't react to. Now, I've had a lot of bad things to say about this game so far, and there are probably more things I could pick at. This game is full of little things that bother me. But you know what? Credit where credit is due. While this game is missing a lot of things I love about Shadow Dragon, I have to say that as a package, the kind of game your average Joe plays through once and never picks up again, FE12 absolutely blows Shadow Dragon out of the water. The previously mentioned aesthetic upgrade already gives the game a huge leg up, but it's not just visuals. The music in this game is fantastic. Shadow Dragon's music was okay, honestly it sometimes got a bit grating, but FE12's soundtrack is full to bursting with bangers. Every single map theme is a hit. I especially love Expedition, the song you're hearing right now. It's so full of energy and really sells the atmosphere of a harrowing on-foot journey through uncharted territory full of dangers. Liberation is the perfect follow-up song. It fantastically fits Marth's triumphant return to Altea after conquering Henri's Way and coming back stronger than ever. And Early Initiative, the player phase combat music, just goes fucking crazy. Shadow Dragon's attack theme is kinda boring. I feel nothing when I attack an enemy in that game. Meanwhile, FE12 hits you with that. It's just so damn punchy. I love it. The story, Chris's inclusion notwithstanding if he isn't to your taste, is a big step up too. There are a lot more moving parts in FE12 than in its predecessor. Characters aside from Marth have a lot more to say and do, and there's genuine intrigue and questions to be answered by the plot. It feels less like a fable and more like a grand fantasy tale, even if it's still on the simplistic side and the overarching conflict boils down to the same thing. Comparing Shadow Dragon and FE12, I don't think there's any way to definitively say which one is the better video game. They're both deeply flawed games in their own ways, but they also excel in their own unique ways. They are remarkably distinct for two games that share so much DNA, but if you put a gun to my head and told me I had to decide which game was better, I'd tell you this. Shadow Dragon is the better strategy game, but FE12 is the better RPG, and neither competition is close. Shadow Dragon is a profoundly customizable and replayable experience. It's Fire Emblem at its most basic, but also at its most unique. You can play it however you want, and as long as you can cross the finish line, you'll never be wrong. But on the writing and presentation side of things, it's incredibly bare bones outside of its simple narrative. If you're the kind of person that likes to replay games, if you're a big Fire Emblem fan and picking a game up for an Iron Man run is your go-to when you're bored, Shadow Dragon is the game for you. Conversely, FE12 is still very customizable in terms of what units you want to use, as well as literally having a customizable character, but the way you actually play the game is far less fluid. The upper and lower bounds for what the game lets you get away with are far more restrictive than in its predecessor. Even without these gameplay restrictions, if it was otherwise identical to Shadow Dragon, its worse map design would still make it an inferior strategy game. But when it comes to writing and presentation, FE12 makes Shadow Dragon look like a joke. Characters feel and quite literally look more alive in FE12. There's more going on with the plot, the music is fantastic, the maps, tedious as they can be, are easier on the eyes. And aside from the gameplay, it's still a huge upgrade. Hell, even if it's not great Fire Emblem, it is still Fire Emblem, and that formula always makes for a fun experience. If you're the kind of person that doesn't get super deep into a game and its mechanics, if you're a fan of games like Xenoblade or Persona, and you play Fire Emblem games to experience the plot and characters, FE12 is what you're looking for, at least more so than Shadow Dragon. That's all it really comes down to. FE12 sacrificed the rough edges and batshit insanity of Shadow Dragon that made it stand out, in order to smooth itself out and make it a more coherent experience. Some would consider this an upgrade. Some would say it loses what made the previous game special, but to me, it's just different. That's the beautiful thing about Fire Emblem as a series. There are 17 games at this point, and every single one of them is distinct. Every entry is different from the last. Remakes improve but don't totally replace their originals. Even a direct sequel in the exact same engine with the same core gameplay loop stands out as its own unique experience. The fact that FE12 is a remake of a second half of a remake and also a sequel to a remake of a different game, yet is also distinct from every game that it's connected to, is quite the feat, and I'm very impressed that Intelligent Systems manages to pull it off game after game. It's a shame that FE12 never made it to the West. You wouldn't know it just by looking at it, since it's a remake of a Super Nintendo game, but FE12 was something of a turning point for the series. It was the first game to include an avatar, a feature that has, graced us with its presence in every subsequent game. Except you, my sweet Shadows of Valentia. God, I love you. It was also the first game to include a casual mode option, which is somewhat contradictory to the game's design, given all the units it throws at you, but whatever, to each his own. Fire Emblem didn't truly commit to leaning heavily on tropey modern anime cliches until Awakening, but FE12 feels like the axis on which the series pivoted before it shot off in that new direction and never looked back. FE12 is both the end of an old era and the beginning of a new one, all wrapped up in an interesting little package and locked overseas. I think as a part of the series, it's an important puzzle piece to figure out how we went from Shadow Dragon to Awakening. Here's hoping that someday Nintendo will pull its head out of its ass and finally give us an official translation of this game. Whew, alright, that's the last of the assassin snails. I should probably go deal with the sinister shadow shrimp crustaceus so he doesn't keep doing this. I have a feeling I know where he is. And that is why Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are perfect remakes and my favorite games of all time. Make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. You've defeated me. Curses, confound it all. Well, with that dealt with, I guess that's the end of this video. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to see more. I really appreciate you all for taking time out of your day to enjoy my videos, it means a lot. Please, if you have any thoughts, let me know what you think of FE12 or my takes on it in the comments below. I'd love to discuss it further and I'll respond to as many as I can. And of course, as always, special shout out to my cool cola crustaceans over on Patreon, Jonas Lesper, Mags is Gaming, Seth Peacock, Dirk Strider, JCKPTH, The Wind is Blowing, David Ramus, and William Hoff. You're all awesome and the support means a lot to me. That being said, you all have a wonderful rest of your day or night, and I'll see you guys next time.